Okay, but my name's Allison and I'm here to answer your questions and provide you information about invasive insects and plant species. I coordinate the Nebraska Invasive Species Program, which is a grant-funded program at the University of Nebraska. And the goal today is to talk about some of those species of most concern in Nebraska. And like I said, feel free to ask any questions you have. Okay, so many of you have probably heard of the emerald ash borer, and that is an insect that causes a lot of problems with specifically ash trees. And so this, as you can see with the top picture on the left there, is a small insect. It's smaller than a penny. And it's actually the larva that is going to compromise and kill the tree, not the adult. And so we'll talk about the life cycle next, but just, hi, can you hear me? Yep, feel free to type any questions in chat and then feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions. So with the emerald ash borer, this is a small insect and there are lots of green insects, believe it or not, in Nebraska. And so just to show you a couple, here's a whole page of lookalike green insects that often we get reported, and we would like you to send us pictures if you have questions, just so we can find this in other parts of our state. But a lot of times the poplar flathead borer over there on the right, people report, or any of these others. And so just keep in mind, this is a very small insect, even though we see this a lot of times on billboards and other materials that make it look really big. So this is the life cycle of the emerald ash borer. What's happening is that the females are actually going to lay eggs on the outside of an ash tree. And so you can see that at the number 1 up top there. And so the adult female is going to lay eggs on the outside of that ash tree. Those eggs are going to hatch, and then they're going to start eating, because they're going to be really, really microscopic. They're going to start eating on the very outside of that bark. As they get more nutrients in their bodies, they're going to get bigger, and they're going to turn into those little white worms you see on the left there, right underneath that number 1. And so then they're going to live all fall and all winter in that tree and eat away and cause these S-shaped channels in the tree. And then next year at this time, they are going to merge as male and females as adults, and they're going to leave this D-shaped exit hole, which is right under the number 3. And when we say D-shape, if you look in the corner on the left there, it has a flat side and a circular side, and that can be of any orientation. But this little tiny hole in an ash tree can be a way to identify that you have emerald ash borer. But again, a lot of things make holes in trees, and this is a really small hole. But this is just an understanding. A lot of people think it's the adult insect that kills the tree, but it's actually that larva eating away, and then after several generations are having babies in this tree and they're growing up, that's what kills the tree, and it can take several years. It's not a 1-year process for most trees. So if you're not sure if you have an ash tree, here are a few things you can do to identify it. On the right there, you can see what the leaf pattern is. And so, sorry, I got that cut off on the right there, but basically you have a leaf on the very end that points straight out, and then you have these 3 leaves on each side of that stem that they come off. And so that's the pinnate, the orientation of those leaves. And so that's one way to look and say, okay, do I have that leaf pattern on this tree? And another way is the female seeds are going to look like this on the left, and a lot of trees, those will overwinter as brown seeds as well. So those, a lot of people have seen those, and that's why, oh yeah, I probably have an ash tree. So currently in Nebraska, we have 8 counties that are quarantined for emerald ash borer. And we have a state quarantine, which means within this red boundary, that bold red boundary, you're not allowed to take certain ash wood products out of that quarantine zone unless it's been treated or mulched or followed some specific rules. And so some people aren't aware that there are state quarantines within that red bolded area. And then you'll see some big red dots within those bolded areas, that bolded area, and those are specific locations where we have county infestations of emerald ash borer. Now, to make this more complicated, there's orange circles around all of that. And those orange circles are treatment consideration zones. So if you have an ash tree and you live within any of those orange circles, you're going to want to evaluate that ash tree and its health, and then consider the longevity and the long-term plan for that tree. And we'll talk more about that. So a lot of times people want to know what symptoms we're looking at. And unfortunately, there really isn't just one thing we can tell you to look at an ash tree and know just by look that, yep, that's the emerald ash borer. But what we can tell you is that if you're within any of those orange circled areas we just talked about, or any of those counties that are quarantined, it's probably in your area. And if you have an ash tree and it's declining, that sure could be one of the causes. And so one of the things we do see is this crown die-off. So you'll see on the picture on the left, once that tree is fully leafed out, you're going to see those top branches are barren. And so the good thing about that is you can treat that tree even at that point. And again, we'll talk about treatment in a minute. But just because you're having some impacts to your tree, you still can treat it. That's the good thing. People think, oh, I got to treat it right away. But you don't. You can actually wait till you have some damage to that tree and keep it alive. And then on the right, we see suckering as well. And so if you see some suckering off the base of that tree, that can, or shooting off of branches, that can be another thing. You're going to wonder what that part of the base of that tree there, what's going on there. And what they did is they actually took away the bark there. And if you look really close, you're going to see some S-shaped scarring there. And so this tree was just a goner. And so they thought they would pull that off to show you specifically what those larval galleries look like underneath that bark. And so that's why that looks kind of weird there on that picture on the right. Okay, so let's talk about treatments. So there's a lot of treatments on the market, and early on when we had these infestations, we had a lot of people peddling products and a lot of confusion. And so I just want to provide you with some resources where you can fact check and send other people to do the same. So the first thing is that we don't want you treating trees just anytime during the year. Specifically, it's important when we do what are some of the most effective ways to treat trees in early spring to mid-June. So this is when those ash trees are going to be coming out of dormancy. They're going to be taking up nutrients. And what we're going to want is to treat at that time. Now, we don't want you treating trees unless you're within any of those orange circles or anywhere within 15 miles where an emerald ash borer has been, confirmed by experts. Okay. So if you're not in that area, if you live somewhere else in this state or another, do not waste money, do not treat this tree, and also treatment can damage this tree. So we don't want to treat this until we actually are having those larvae in the tree or the adults to kill them. So we don't want to be premature. We want to treat after we have them, okay? So you got to be within 15 miles. The other thing to consider is there's lots of different chemicals on the market. And one that has shown success and long-term success within trees, as in they can provide more than a year or two in treatment for trees, so you don't have to inject it every year, is this underlying chemical right here. And so this was something that the Nebraska Forest Service and others extension services have suggested. So that's one chemical you can look into, and it is injected. And so you're going to need a certified arborist to do so. And my website, which I'll show you, has information on the website, so you can check out more information on this and other treatments. Like I said, there are other treatments on the market. You could probably go to a Lowe's or a nursery store and buy other treatments, one of which would be a soil dredge. And so there are chemicals that are sold to be poured onto the base or the ground around the tree to then be taken up by the tree. The problem that we see with those chemicals is that they can be run off and they can be taken up by other plants, and those can have impacts to pollinators and insects as well as those other plants. So soil dredges are not they're not suggested, and really, if you're going to be treating your tree, these injections with that chemical are what are suggested. Now, like I said, every time that we are injecting that tree, we are causing harm to it, and we are injecting it with chemical. And so this is going to be a continuous thing you're going to have to do to this tree every, like I said, 2 to 3 years, or as this chemical or other chemicals get better, maybe less often, but there is a cost with that. And so the first thing you need to do is to evaluate any trees you do have and determine if they are worth saving. Just one last thing on that then is it is our native ash tree species that are susceptible. So our green ash, our black ash. Our mountain ash are not going to be susceptible. So if you have a mountain ash tree, that's not going to be susceptible. Don't worry about it. But our green ash, our black ash, and you can learn more on our website. So then let me move on to the Asian longhorn beetle. And the Asian longhorn beetle is a very large beetle, and we are bringing this to your attention because it could be very devastating for us if we were ever to get this in Nebraska. And we find this coming into the United States all the time in wood packing material and furniture and all sorts of wood products and other products that are shipped here. And so these Asian longhorn beetles are very long. So unlike an emerald ash borer that you'll probably never see on a tree, this guy is big. He's, you know, the size of your pinky finger. And so we, in other states that have found this, they were able to identify it early, especially because of the size of the insect and those holes that it leaves very circular holes in trees, and it impacts maple, willow, elm, birch, buckeye trees. So very nice hardwood trees. And so that's why we're very concerned about it. But just like the life cycle of the emerald ash borer, the female are going to lay eggs on the outside of that maple tree. Those are going to hatch, and then the larvae, just like the other larvae, are going to be eating within the heartwood of that tree, maturing, and then they're the ones that make that exit hole that's circular. Now, if I bring your attention to the bottom right side, you're going to see some holes in that trunk right there. And the concerning thing about that is that the way that these larvae eat, they will actually cause structural deficiencies to the trees. And so unlike the emerald ash borer that's going to kill a tree, this will kill the tree, but it could fall over on your house. So this is more of a concern because structurally it does compromise that tree. And currently we have this on the East Coast. So we want you to be on a lookout for it and do report what you see. There are some lookalikes though. And so we often get calls on the cottonwood borer on the left or the Sawyer beetle on the right there. And they are similar. So be aware, we do have some natives that are just fine. But again, we do want reports if you are to see that insect. Another insect we're very concerned about is the spotted lanternfly. And the spotted lanternfly has a lot of different issues that come along with it. First of all, on the left there is what it looks like when it flies. So it can fly around. And so of course that's going to help it to be more mobile. The other thing is it has egg masses on the right there that it pastes to everything from vehicles to tires to just anything, side of houses. It pastes those to anything. And so within those are of course going to be many larvae. And so this guy is getting around the country on mobile things like trucks and equipment and trains potentially. And so this is coming our way. We want you to be our eyes and ears, and please tell others too as well. It's still a ways away from us, and I'll talk about that, but this is one that could have potential problems for us, and we definitely don't want it spreading any more than it needs to across the US. It is technically a leaf sucker, and so what these guys do is they have a mouth part that they then pierce the stems. So right there in the middle, you're going to see a grapevine there, and you can see all of these little spotted lanternflies crawling around on it, and that's what they like to do is huddle together like that. And they will then take their mouth part and cut into the stem there and then suck out the juices, and that's what they're going to eat on. But then what happens is they secrete then a honeydew, and that's going to be a sappy substance that is going to be excreted on the tree or these grapes or whatever they're eating on. And these guys eat on fruit trees as well as grapes as well as hardwood trees. And so they have over 100 different plants that they will use. And that is very disturbing because these guys could have a huge impact on our commodities, on our fruit and our trees. And so we're very concerned about, from an economic standpoint, what this could do to some farming practices. And so another thing it does with that sappy discharge is that will actually grow a mold substance, and it's called black sooty mold. And so that could have billions of dollars of impacts on our jobs and our other fruit tree industries. And so we're very concerned about this one. And thank you for that question. Does it just affect fruit trees? It does not. Its actual favorite thing in the world is tree of heaven, which is an invasive tree. I'm sure you all know. So as you're out there doing surveys or looking around, tree of heaven is one that's a very invasive tree, and it loves it. And so that's one of the ways in Nebraska and other places they're doing early detection. And that's how they actually found it first in Pennsylvania, was on tree of heaven. And so it is very non-discriminatory, and it does like fruit trees though, and grapes and hops also. So not only a concern for those fruit, but also for hardwoods potentially. Thank you for that question. Yeah, and so a question was, I think someone put a green trap in my tree. And so, yeah, what they're doing in Nebraska, to my knowledge, and I can check on that as well, is that they've been looking at Tree of Heaven to do early detection for that. And then they've been using the purple traps and sometimes green for emerald ash borer and a number of other insects. And so they are actively looking, absolutely, in Nebraska. Okay, so here is currently where this guy is. And like I said, we're really trying to be proactive and let everybody across the United States know about this guy because it could be so bad for our fruit industry, farmers, and also for hardwoods. And so this was first found in Pennsylvania, and that was in 2014. And like I said, they found that on a tree of heaven, literally, just by chance. And so then you'll see on this map, we have on the green, those are actually quarantines. And so those are areas that have had those infestations. They're trying to keep a hold of them, eradicate them. And then orange, or gold, they call it, is where they have found a spotted lanternfly, but not an infestation. Okay, so they've been doing, you know, all the early detection we can, and it's pretty hit or miss until you get a good population of these guys going. And so alarms kind of started going off, especially last year. And so that's when a lot of us started doing early detection, looking at putting these sticky bands, as you see on the right there, on trees and monitoring for them. But of course, the main mode of transportation for them is these egg masses that are being laid on trucks and other mobile equipment. And so in Nebraska, we've actually, the Department of Ag has actually reached out to people that have trucking contracts out of these states shown, especially Pennsylvania, so that we can get in contact with those truckers and make sure that they're inspecting their gear before they're coming our way and the way of the West. So it's great how we are being proactive, because yeah, this guy has a lot of complications that we sure don't want. Yes, and so where the eggs are is, very good question, thank you. And so I'll take you back to this picture here, what the tunnels look like in these egg masses. So basically when these females are depositing this, they're putting material on top to basically make a glue on top of all the egg cases themselves. And then there you go. So right here is underneath, what you would actually see are the individual eggs right there. And then over top, they put this mass on top to prevent them from being picked off easily. Yep, thank you for that. So please don't move firewood. What we say about firewood, which can transport all of these insects as well as diseases and other pathogens, is do not move firewood out of the county of origin. If you don't know where that firewood came from, do not take it home with you. Do not move it. And then also, if you ever find firewood being sold that doesn't have a label on it, please report it. Our Department of Ag and other departments of Ag do actively survey to find such articles, because some of them are needing quarantine. Please report them via my website, and we will pass that report on. So another thing is plant diversity. So we've talked here about a number of insects that have a lot of different hosts. And so the more diversity in trees and plants, the better. If we have a whole street of ash trees, for example, which we do in some communities, they're all going to be wiped out potentially by this, or they're going to have costs attributed to removals and treatments. And so the more diverse we can be in our tree plantings, the better. We can't outguess what that next tree that might be susceptible is. And so that is an important thing to look at and to move towards in our communities. So another insect I want to talk to you, it's not an insect, it's just classified on my website as such, as the Asian jumping worm. And back in 2019, we actually ran an article, the extension did, in the Omaha and Lincoln paper after we did a news release from the university. And the reason we did it was because we had a concern that we probably have these in the state. We may have these in the state, the entire state, we don't know. And the reason we wanted to find out was because there's a real lack of knowledge of what impacts these guys could have to a prairie situation, or even to nursery, backyard nursery situations, gardens, for instance. And so this was an ability for us to get information to the public and then ask for people to go look at it. And so now as things are warming up and as we go through the summer here, this is a great opportunity for people to report if they find these or if they find sign of them. And so these are sold under a few different names, which include Alabama jumpers or crazy jumping worms. And they're called such, I'll show you a video, because of their spastic behavior. So they act more like a snake than a worm. When we think of a worm, you know, like an earthworm, they just kind of wiggle around, you know, right? Pretty passive. These guys really move. And so one thing they are sold as is bait, because when underwater, when they're agitated, they will move frantically, and they can live underwater for 20 minutes plus. And so they are being sold online, even as a recycler, and we'll talk about why that might not be the best. But Asian jumping worms, these encompass 17 different species of worm, and it's in this genus, the Amuthes. And so there's 17 species, they're all under that. And they're very hard to identify from our earthworm, unless you have them right next to each other. And so that's another thing to think about is taxonomically, they're really hard just to kind of look at the and see, but their behavior gives us a good identification tool. What these guys do is they feed on the very top leaf and litter layers. So just the first 3 to 4 inches of soil is where these guys will be in very high numbers because they reproduce very frequently, and they will quickly make all of that soil look like ground coffee grounds. And so you're going to see there, that's where their castings or their excretions are going to actually bind up a lot of material that will then be washed away, let's say if you have a heavy rain. But it looks like ground coffee grounds. So if you ever go in your backyard or somewhere you see these tightly bound grounds, that is a warning factor to think of, maybe we have these here. Okay, so just to go a little more into that with you, when we think of our earthworms, which of course there's worms that are great at recycling and decomposing materials, organic matter, and then creating channels within the soil to make our soils more fertile. And of course, that's why they're also good at composting, right? So when we get compost piles, you can put certain worms in there, they're going to break all that down for you and make that all nutritious so that you can put it in your garden. These guys are not doing any of those great things, unfortunately. If you look at the far right there, these guys live in the first 3 to 4 inches of the soil. So they're going to be breaking down that mulch that's on top, any organic matter, you know, detritus that's there. And they're just going to be eating there. And they're going to have a lot of them over time, basically recycling all of that organic matter and binding it up in their castings. And so instead of breaking it down and creating channels to then move all of that down into the soil, they're not going down into the soil at all. So that's one big difference. And so what we're concerned about here is, especially in forested situations, there has been a lot of research, especially in like the Smoky Mountains out east. And they've actually found that complete changes of forest systems has been completely halted. They've had no regeneration, and they've actually had the inability of tree seedlings to have anything to hold on to, because these guys recycled all of that organic matter, and those seedlings have nowhere to root to. And so it's pretty amazing in those forested situations what they've seen. Now, like I said, there's been a lack of knowledge here in the United States in our prairie situations of what these guys could do, or even in garden situations, are these guys that concerning? And so that's something that conversations are being done, and there are some universities looking into do some of that work. So stay tuned. We will have some information in the future, I think, on that. Right now, we're kind of more in the detection mode in Nebraska. So here's a couple of things I can tell you about how to identify them. So Asian jumping worms and our common earthworm on the top there. So on the top, we have our earthworm. On the bottom, we have our crazy jumping worm, or our Asian jumping worm. And the clitellum, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with your fishing worms, right? They have that band around them, right, towards the top of their head. And on a earthworm, that is actually raised. So that's going to be raised off their body, and it's not going to go all the way around their body. Now on an Asian jumping worm, which especially you can see on the left here, it's more of a milky white. Again, this is really hard to identify unless you have the two next to each other, but it's going to be more of a milky white, and it goes around their entire body. So Asian jumping worm, clitellum, all the way around the body. The other thing about these guys is they're not slimy. If you pick them up, it's like picking up a gummy worm. It's really weird. They're very rubbery. So if it's not slimy and you have that, please report it. And either way, just send us a picture. We'd love to see it. Really the telltale way is their activity. And so this is what we had somebody send us last fall when she was just walking her dog here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and she saw this with her dog. So here's the activity that she watched and said, hey, I think so as you can see, you know, all worms might act a little differently, but the way that they crawl around like that, we've seen as we watch more and more of these, they just are more worm-like, or I'm sorry, snake-like in that back and forth kind of movement. And then they're really spastic. And so you can go on YouTube and look at Asian jumping worms or Alabama crawlers, and they really are just that spastic. So that's the activity we're kind of looking at. And one thing you can do is you can actually take some mustard powder or just mustard and water and kind of douse that in an area. And that would be a way you're going to irritate any worms that are in that top soil layer, which probably are Asian jumping worms, could be earthworms as well, and bring them to the surface. And so there's some kind of fun over the summer and into the fall we can have people do to help us identify where in the state we do have these. We have only had them reported in 4 counties now. So if you're in any of those 4 counties, where do you know about them? Feel free to, you know, send me any pictures, but we do know that they're there. So it is more of the rest of the state that we're looking for information. Because like I said, I think that we would be interested in looking at some research, and people all over are really interested in where these guys are. These guys have probably been here for a very long time. We haven't been looking for them. They're little guys that go under the surface, but we have found them in, let's say, like Fontenelle Forest. And so that's an area where we could look at doing some monitoring and some research there, because we have seen that that area does have them. There was a landowner right there that we were able to find on his property. So please let me know if you have any questions on that. I have a whole bunch of information on my website, and how you can report these guys is on my website. So anyinvasives.com is the website, and there's a whole bunch of information about Asian jumping worms. And then there is a report a sighting right on the same page. You'll learn about any insect or any plant you want to, and that's how you can actually report it. You can always contact us and send us an email too if you just have a question about something and you want to send us a picture or anything. But this is the reporting tool that you can pass on to anyone and encourage them to look for these worms as they're out and about. So I'm going to move on really quickly to invasive plants and give you an overview, and then I'd be happy to field any questions on this or any other invasive questions you might have. So in Nebraska, we have on our website, the anyinvasives.com, organized our state by ecoregions. And ecoregions are something that the game and parks use to group a set of counties in different ecoregions. And so on the far left, it got cut off, but that's the shortgrass prairie. We have the sandhills, the mixed grass prairie, and the tall grass prairie. And so the first thing you can do when you come into our website in the plant section is just pick whichever section of the state you're interested in learning more about. And then you're going to get a pop-up once that next page opens, and it's going to show this drop down right here. And in Nebraska, we have a few different categories of plants. And the first of those is state noxious, and that's what's highlighted here. So we'll go into those, and those would be ones that are at a state level regulated. We're then going to talk about our county noxious, which are right there next to that arrow there. And then we'll talk about our priority, future, and established plants. Finally, what we have on here are problematic plants. So these are plants that technically could be native in parts of Nebraska and cause some people problems. And another thing we probably have on there as well is perhaps some information on ornamental plants. That's something we're going to be putting some more information up on. And so just to let you know, first of all, when you come to the website to learn more about invasive plants, this is how we have it organized. So the first one we'll talk about are Nebraska's noxious weeds. And so what noxious weeds are is That is actually a legal term by our Department of Agriculture, and there are fines that can be issued for landowners that do not control any state noxious weeds on their property. And the reason for this is because these plants are so difficult and expensive to control. And in some situations, we can't even control them because we might have restrictions on chemical use or access issues, or they're in aquatic environments. And so our noxious weeds here, we have 12 of them. You'll notice that there are several thistle species. And one confusion thing I think that we have out there is that all thistles are bad thistles. And that's, of course, as many of you know, is not true. And so specifically these thistles on this list are ones that are hard to control, important to control, and cause us a lot of issues. Leafy spurge is of course a species that is one of our hardest ones to control because of its ability to be resistant against chemicals. And so leafy spurge is one that we deal a lot with our range and cropped areas. Purple loosestrife here, this is a wetland plant also on our river systems. And this was one that started out as an ornamental plant we brought over from Asia because we thought it was so pretty and so hard to kill in yards. But unfortunately, those attributes made it really hard to keep it from spreading away from those plantings. And so you would actually get monocultures in entire wetlands. We have our spotted and diffuse knapweeds, and those are actually allelopathic, so they will excrete chemicals into the soil, so prohibit anything but those knapweeds from growing. And so that's one of the issues with that plant being an issue to control. We have salt cedar, which again was one that was first sold as an ornamental plant and very pretty. It grows to almost a small tree here, but when you go to Texas, it is a very, very large tree. And so that's one they can drink liters to gallon a day each. And so that can be a problem with them taking water from our water systems. We have Phragmites, I'll talk about in a minute. We have Sericea lespedeza, that's becoming more prolific, and we're tracking that. Japanese and Bohemian knotweed, as well as giant knotweed, these are like a bamboo. They can grow 1 to 3 feet a day. They are extremely hard to control. Even a part of these plants can spread into a whole new infestation. And especially in Douglas County, we've had a lot of problems controlling this because of people planting it ornamentally. So Phragmites is probably one of our top invasive plants in the state that causes issues and costs us millions of dollars. And so we do have a native Phragmites plant, which is on the right there. It can be really hard to decipher an invasive Phragmites from a native unless you have them next to each other, just because of the height difference. But our natives, our invasive obviously is more of an issue because it creates dense stands that are impenetrable by water. And so starting back in 2011 and 12, the Weed Control Association started having helicopters spraying along our river systems and spent millions of dollars and really worked hard at that. When we had those serious floods then, subsequently, a lot of Omaha was not flooded as badly as it could have been if some of that preventative spraying had not been occurring. And so that is one thing we've learned is that helicopter spraying, it is effective. And so there's actually a legislation that's in place to give funds annually for the control of Phragmites for that purpose. And that's given to the Nebraska Weed Control Association through a grants program. Something I'll point out here is on the bottom right there, these guys reproduce by rhizomes. And so they'll actually shoot out these rhizomes, and every little shoot you see coming up there is a new plant. And so very quickly it will overtake an entire area. And for some reason, these guys always know where the water is. You'll see those little shoots, they just all go for the water somehow. It's kind of amazing. So that's one way it's so effective in creating these very dense stands very quickly. And then into the fall, they keep erect and look like that all winter long. So in the wintertime, when nothing else is growing, this is a way to identify them. And it's a good way to flag new infestations that need to be controlled. Cut leaves teasel. So this is the second category I talked about. So we just talked about our state listed noxious weeds. And that means across the entire state, you can't have any of those species on your property or you could be fined, or whichever agency could be fined. Now, when we talk about county listed noxious weeds, that means that it's specific to a county. So right now, Lancaster County has cutleaf and common teasels listed as county noxious weeds, which means in Lancaster County, if you have these on your property, you could be fined. Now, if you're not in Lancaster County and it's not listed in your county, you can't be. Okay, so this is county specific. And why these guys are so concerning is because they have this huge seed head. And so you'll see on the bottom right there, that's them in the fall time, and kind of like PHRAGMITES in the fall and out of growing season. These guys will be erect all winter long. And so that's a way to drive down the road and really identify them and point them out and say, hey, I got this patch, and then to report it to the Weed Control Association or to have it chemically controlled, or you control it. The cutleaf teasel we find is a little more aggressive than the common, and it tends to be 6 to 8 feet tall. You can see that on the right. And a lot of where we're seeing this is on roadsides. And so as you drive through Iowa, Wisconsin, other states, they're really seeing this marching down interstates and highways. And once you become familiar with what this looks like, I bet you're going to start seeing it too. And so that's good for us, at least, is that for early detection, this is a noticeable plant. The cutleaf teasel has white flowers. You can see that on the top there. And common teasel has those lilac color violet flowers, and it's a little shorter. Something to note is both of these guys will tear your hands up. They have little prickly needles all over them, and so please use gloves. You're gonna tear your hands up if you don't. Another thing to notice is that the first year, this is a rosette, and then the second year it will bolt. Now, this is a very adaptive plant. One of the reasons it's so invasive is that if in year 2, it is not gonna be a good year and it can sense that, let's say it's a drought and it's a bad year to bolt, it'll stay in rosette another year. But if it's okay to bolt, then in year 2, it's gonna bolt, and it's gonna put up these stands and these flowers. Now you'll see these flowers are kind of going down that seed head in a circle. Well, that's because this plant is really smart. It starts from the top, and it doesn't just all flower at once, it waits. And so it systematically waits and slowly releases seeds instead of all doing it at once, like a thistle would, for example. So that's another really interesting adaptation of this plant to outcompete other things, because unlike releasing all of these at once, it's gonna mature those flowers at different times. And so that it's gonna give more of a chance for pollination in that process, and therefore you're gonna get more seed in the end product. So kind of a cool thing about this plant, even though of course it's very invasive, but historically this was planted in cemeteries. And one of the first places we saw this in Nebraska were in cemetery plantings. And also in the dry plant trade, you may see this too. So it's not noxious in the state of Nebraska. They think because of its adaptations, it sure is a concern though. So we're watching it closely. There are 3 more categories then. And so the first is, if you go on our website and you go to whichever county, you're gonna see future invasive plants. And what future invasive means is that these are plants that cause real concern to us based on risk assessments. So we've looked at the biology of these plants and what they need to live, and we found that if these got to Nebraska, they had the chance of really being devastating to our water bodies. In other ecoregions, and in this one, there's going to be terrestrial plants as well. This is just an example here of just aquatic plants. So these would be three invasive plants that if we ever found in Nebraska, we would want to report them right away. We'd want to eradicate them right away because they pose an issue in the future potentially. So then priority invasive plants are going to be species we found in Nebraska, but we want to control where we do find new infestations. So garlic mustard's a good one on the left top right there that many of you may be familiar with, let's say at Fontenelle Forest or Pioneers Park in Lincoln or Omaha. People pull pounds of this stuff by hand every early spring, early summertime, because it will dominate an understory. And this plant is actually toxic to butterfly larvae and also toxic to horses. It also is allelopathic, so it will secrete a chemical into the soil which inhibits anything but it from growing. So even after you pull this stuff, you're going to have some of that residual chemical, and that can actually change the mycorrhizae, and that can change kind of the microbial proponents of the soil. So priority are ones that we know we have in Nebraska. Any new infestations, we want to be right on them and control them. And these are ones that, especially absinthe wormwood, that's one that we were seeing in the north part of the state, but we are seeing more heading this way on the east. So these are priorities because we don't want them to get extremely widespread. And then finally, established plants. So these are two plants that are established in the tallgrass prairie, and Callery pear, also known as Bradford pear, is a tree that has been planted ornamentally a lot in residential developments and just residential areas. And it was a very attractive plant because it's one of the first to get flowers. So right now in Lincoln, we're having them flower out right now. And a good thing about that is that you can actually see where they have invaded non-resident areas adjacent to them. And so that's one concern we have with this plant, is that we have seen it invade non-residential areas when it's close to a residential area, for example. And so we're trying to get a feel in the tallgrass prairie states where this is. Is it really going to be an issue overtaking a lot of area or not so much? And so that's why we're putting that on the established list for our weed control authorities to be looking out for, so we get better data on where this is. So you're not going to be penalized for owning this tree, but there sure are some options that might be better, because we are seeing this Callery pear revert to being kind of really a pain in some areas that aren't managed. And then crown vetch, of course, is one that is established, and just we're getting more data on how widespread it is, and of course it can be manageable. So just to reiterate, when you go to our plant page, just pick a part of the state, and then you're going to have all these categories on the bottom there to look between. And one that I didn't talk about was problematic. So in the tallgrass prairie, if you go to the problematic category, it's going to bring up eastern red cedar, for instance, and that would be a plant that our Invasive Species Council isn't all comfortable calling invasive, although it has biologically invasive properties to it. There are different stances on that tree, and so there's lots of good reading material for you there. There's a whole literacy page website for you to get some more information, no matter what your views are. That's just one that we did want to draw some attention to, because we were getting some questions on eastern red cedar. So with that, there's my contact information. And on the bottom, anyinvasives.com, you can learn more about all of these species and more. And also you can send people, and you yourself can report any species you have or any questions you have. So with that, I can open it up to any one that wants to ask a question or type in a question. Feel free to unmute yourself or type in a question. Feel free. Okay, yep. Thank you guys, I really appreciate it, and we did record this, so let me know if you have any questions. What's the best way to get the word out about invasives? Good question, thank you. Some ways would be contributing to any newsletters that you're a part of, or any kind of public reading that you're wanting to get is, of course, a lot of people are on Twitter and Facebook. So if you're part of an organization or have some tidbits you want to share to people, I think that social media is good for that as well. But I have found that any audience you're specifically trying to target, that's kind of important to learn their channels of communication, and also bring up things that are timely. So here on our Facebook and Twitter, I'll be tweeting about Callery pear, because right now it's flowering right now in a lot of places, and there are some concerns about Callery pear. And so that's another way, is being timely in putting that information out. It's not a great science, unfortunately, knowing exactly how to do it, but that's one thing I've found, Justin. Will there be questions? There will be. Thank you. And thank you, Lisa, for teaching 7th graders about invasives. And if you want any more materials, please let me know. Matt Jones was wondering if we're going to have technicians to do watercraft inspections this year. Since 2012, my program and the Game and Parks have funded technicians to go to high-use water bodies across the state of Nebraska and inspect watercrafts and survey boaters to learn about their boating habits, and also teaching them to clean, drain, dry to prevent the spread of aquatic invasives. Unfortunately, because of our current situation, the Game and Parks Commission and the University of Nebraska have restrictions on hiring and also on public interactions. And so at this time, there is no hires on board to do watercraft inspections. We are going to be trying to increase signage publicly because we know people are going to be out there boating, and also do that. But currently we have no people that are going to be going out to actually interview boaters. Hopefully that'll change. Maybe this will, later in the season we'll be able to. We just can't do that right now. So we're going to try to be creative with that outreach. Jonathan asked, when we see invasives on private property, should we contact our county weed office? Yeah, I would say if you find invasive species on a private property, to call your Nebraska Weed Control Authority. And so you can go to the Nebraska Weed Control Association website and you can say find an inspector, and it shows right by county who that is. If you have a problem finding that website or want to report it to me, I will just be reporting it to them to get them in the loop. And so it's best to go to them, but feel free to go through me if you have any questions. My Facebook is on my website. So if you go just to the anyinvasives.com website and you scroll to the bottom, there is going to be a link there to our Facebook page. And it's anyinvasives.com. But yeah, right on my website's my email address, phone number, and then also to our Facebook page. You can go there as well. What is my least favorite invasive species? I'm going to say emerald ash borer for insects right now because, of course, that's the one that we've been dealing with. Zebra mussels I spend so much time with, and they concern me because we have such challenges for aquatics. And then with plants, I would just say Phragmites because I've personally experienced it quite a bit, and I know the impacts it can have to wetlands and rivers. Thank you, Jonathan, for the question. Thank you all for the questions, and feel free to contact me. Here's my contact information, and send others our way. Thank you very much. Let me know if I can provide you with anything else.